A billionaire in disguise walks into a small cafe, thinking it's just another ordinary morning. But when a young black waitress slips a folded note into his hand, his world shatters. It isn't a love note, it isn't a plea for money, it's a secret tied to his past, one that will force him to face everything he's tried to bury. From that moment, nothing in his life will ever be the same. This is not just a story, it's a piece of someone's hidden pain, quietly waiting to be heard. In today's story, we dive into a moment that can change everything, in the most unexpected way. Before we begin, where are you listening from? Canada? The US? Norway? Let us know in the comments, because stories may begin anywhere, but they connect us all. Stay with us until the very end, because sometimes, what breaks your heart can also heal it. And if you believe stories can change lives, hit subscribe. Join our journey. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment. Your voice matters here. The rain came down in silver threads, each droplet tapping against the city's restless heartbeat. Neon signs flickered on cracked sidewalks, and the distant rumble of traffic bled into the night like an unending hymn. In the corner of a small, forgotten cafe tucked between shuttered laundromats and pawn shops, life moved slowly, almost defiantly against the chaos of the world outside. It was here, where chipped ceramic mugs carried bitter warmth and tired souls sought a moment's refuge, that a secret would be exchanged. One so unexpected, so earth-shaking, that it would unravel the careful disguise of a man who had spent years hiding behind layers of wealth, power, and silence. He wasn't supposed to be noticed. Not here, not in a neighborhood where no one looked twice at strangers, and strangers rarely lingered. Yet fate, or perhaps something greater, had woven their paths together. The man was a billionaire, though no one would ever have guessed. Tonight, he wore jeans that smelled faintly of rain, a threadbare jacket he'd bought secondhand, and the wary expression of a traveler who had forgotten his destination. He was supposed to be invisible, and she, the waitress, was not supposed to matter. She was just another figure in the background, another forgotten face in the endless carousel of city nights. But her eyes carried something deeper, and her silence whispered truths she had never dared to speak aloud. When she slipped him the note, their worlds collided. His carefully guarded past, her unspoken pain, and a secret that could break everything open. The ink on that scrap of paper would change not just the course of his life, but of hers, and perhaps, in ways neither could see, the lives of many others. The billionaire, who came only for a cup of coffee, would leave with a burden greater than his fortune. And the waitress, who risked everything with just a few words, would awaken a storm she couldn't control. This is their story. The little bell above the cafe door gave a tired jingle as he stepped in. The place was almost empty. Two students huddled in the corner over textbooks, a homeless man nursing the warmth of his cup like it was his last tether to life, and the faint hum of jazz crackling through an old radio. He paused at the doorway, scanning the dim room. His eyes, though tired, carried an intensity that belonged to a man accustomed to reading people in seconds. Tonight, however, he was not here as himself. Not as Alexander Pierce, the billionaire whose name commanded respect in boardrooms and headlines, but as just another man. The disguise was deliberate. He had been living like this for months now, slipping unnoticed into places no billionaire would dare to tread. It was more than curiosity. It was hunger. A need to taste the world without gold-tinted lenses. Coffee. Her voice broke his thoughts. She stood at the counter, apron tied neatly around her waist, skin glowing under the low light, eyes both tired and sharp. She was beautiful, but not in the polished, effortless way of women he had known in his world. Her beauty came from something raw, unyielding, like a flame that refused to die no matter how many storms tried to smother it. "Yes," he said softly, taking a seat by the window. His voice was deeper than he intended, and he quickly lowered his gaze. She poured the coffee, set it in front of him, and lingered for a moment longer than expected. He caught it, the hesitation, the flicker in her eyes, as though she wanted to say something but swallowed it back down. Then she was gone, retreating to the safety of the counter. He wrapped his hands around the mug, letting the warmth seep into his skin. The bitter aroma filled his senses, grounding him. For a moment he allowed himself to forget who he was. But then, when he lifted the mug again, he saw it. Folded neatly beneath the cup, pressed against the condensation of the saucer, was a slip of paper. His brows furrowed. He glanced toward the counter. She wasn't looking at him, pretending instead to busy herself with the register. Slowly, he unfolded the note. His pulse quickened as his eyes traced the hastily written words, "I know who you are. Please don't leave before I can explain." The mug trembled slightly in his hand. His heart thudded, heavy and uncertain. How could she know? And more importantly, what did she want? The billionaire's secret identity is not as safe as he thought. Who is this waitress, and why is she calling him out? Alexander's thumb lingered on the edge of the paper, tracing the ink as though the words themselves could burn him. His disguise had held firm through months of wandering, through dimly lit bars and nameless motels, through streets where no one looked long enough to care. He had been certain he could vanish into anonymity. Yet here, in a quiet cafe on a rain-soaked night, a waitress had unraveled him with a single sentence. He forced himself to look up. She was at the counter, back turned to him now, her fingers fidgeting with the rag she used to polish cups that were already spotless. Her movements were too precise, too deliberate. She was waiting, for him, for a reaction, for the storm she knew she had unleashed. His mind raced. There were only a handful of possibilities. Perhaps she recognized him from the newspapers, though few ever noticed him when he shed the expensive suits and stood stripped of his entourage. Or perhaps she knew something more, something dangerous. Alexander's jaw tightened. For years he had guarded a truth buried so deep even his closest associates didn't dare whisper it. If she knew that, then the paper in his hand was more than a warning. It was a threat. He folded the note carefully, slipping it into his jacket pocket as though it were a fragile secret. His coffee had gone lukewarm, untouched, but he forced himself to take a sip. He needed time, to think, to measure her. Finally, he rose from his seat and approached the counter. "You forgot to give me sugar," he said. His voice was calm, casual, too casual. She looked up, startled. For a split second, her mask cracked. Fear, regret, and then just as quickly she forced a polite smile. "Sorry, I'll get you some." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "What do you know?" Her hand froze on the sugar jar. Their eyes met, and in hers he saw something unexpected. Not malice, not greed, but desperation. The kind of desperation that clung to people who had nothing left to lose. "Not here," she whispered. "Please, wait until my shift ends." Midnight. She glanced at the clock on the wall. Just wait. Alexander straightened, studying her. Every instinct screamed at him to walk away, to burn the note, to vanish into the night before anyone else connected him to this place. Billionaires did not gamble on the words of strangers. And yet there was something in her voice, in the way her lips trembled when she spoke. It wasn't a game. It was a plea. "Midnight," he repeated, his tone sharp. She nodded once quickly, before turning away again, shutting him out with the mechanical rhythm of her work. Alexander returned to his seat, but the cafe no longer felt like a safe refuge. Every flicker of neon outside, every shuffle of footsteps on the wet pavement, pressed against him with suspicion. The walls seemed closer, the air heavier. He had come here for anonymity, for silence. Instead, he had been pulled into a web he couldn't yet see. And deep down, though he hated to admit it, he wasn't sure if he wanted to escape. Why is the waitress so desperate for him to stay? And what truth could she possibly hold that makes her tremble at the thought of speaking it aloud? The rain had eased by the time midnight crept upon the city, leaving behind slick streets that shimmered under the jaundiced glow of street lamps. The cafe, once dimly alive with the shuffle of late, night customers, was now silent. The students had packed up their books hours ago. The homeless man had drifted into the night, his cup still steaming faintly where he left it. Alexander sat alone at his corner table, fingers drumming against the ceramic mug. The coffee had long gone cold, but he hadn't moved. Not even once. He had been waiting, listening to the tick of the old wall clock that seemed determined to remind him how foolish he was to stay. Finally, she appeared from the back, her apron gone, her hair tied loosely as though she had rushed to leave. For the first time, she wasn't just a waitress. Out of uniform, she looked younger, softer, but her eyes betrayed her. They carried a storm. "Come with me," she said quietly, sliding her coat on. Alexander hesitated, his instincts warning him against stepping into the unknown. But the note in his pocket weighed heavier than reason, and so he rose. They walked out into the night, the city breathing around them. The streets smelled of rain and diesel, and every shadow seemed alive. She led him 2 blocks down to a narrow alley where an old fire escape groaned with rust. Beneath it, she stopped, turned, and faced him. "You don't remember me, do you?" she asked. The question struck him cold. He studied her face in the weak glow of the streetlight. Her features, sharp jawline, tired eyes, skin the color of polished mahogany, didn't spark any memory. Still, there was something hauntingly familiar in her voice, as though it carried an echo he couldn't place. "No," he admitted. "Should I?" Her lips trembled. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded photograph, pressing it into his hand. Alexander unfolded it carefully. The picture was old, creased at the edges, but clear enough to see a young girl, perhaps 10 or 11, smiling shyly at the camera. And standing just behind her, a much younger version of himself, dressed in a tailored suit, shaking hands with a man Alexander vaguely recalled from charity galas years ago. His stomach tightened. "That's me," she whispered, pointing to the girl. "And you shook my father's hand that day. You promised him something, but you never kept it." Alexander's breath caught. Memory rushed back in fragments. The gala, the speeches, the bold promises he had made while the cameras flashed. He had pledged support for local families, scholarships for their children, a future for those who had none. He had forgotten those words the moment the lights dimmed and the press left. But she hadn't. Her eyes glistened as she stepped closer. My father died 2 years later. We lost everything. And while you climbed higher, we fell. I've been waiting for years, for this moment. For you to see what your promises cost. Alexander swallowed hard, guilt pressing like iron on his chest. He had built an empire, yes. But how many forgotten faces had paid the price for his neglect? And yet, something didn't add up. If this is about money, he began, but she cut him off, her voice fierce. This isn't about money. It's about truth, and the truth is bigger than you think. Her words hung in the damp night air, heavy, unshakable. Alexander felt it then. This was no mere confrontation. This was the opening of a wound that had never healed. And beneath her anger, he sensed something else, a danger. What truth is she holding back? And why does it feel like more than just a broken promise? The photograph shook in Alexander's hand. The edges cut faintly into his skin as if the paper itself wanted to remind him that words, careless words, had consequences. He stared at the smiling child in the picture, then at the woman standing before him, her eyes raw with betrayal. Her voice was low, steady, but beneath it, he could hear the tremor of years spent swallowing anger. You made a promise that night. Scholarships, housing support, my father believed you. He told us we'd be safe because Alexander Pierce had spoken, and the world listened to Alexander Pierce. She took a shaky breath. But no help came. Instead, the company your foundation invested in stripped my father's neighborhood bare. Land gone. Jobs gone. We lost everything. Alexander's throat tightened. He remembered the gala. He remembered shaking hands, smiling for the cameras. But he also remembered the boardroom decisions, the numbers that reduced human lives into quarterly reports. Had he been so blind? Or had he chosen blindness because it was easier than seeing the ruin beneath his empire shine? You think I knew? His voice cracked against the night air, softer than he intended. You think I sat in some room and decided your family's fate? Her eyes blazed. It doesn't matter if you knew. It was your name. It was your empire. And while you built towers of glass and steel, my mother cleaned bathrooms just to keep us alive. I waited tables, worked double shifts, just to breathe. And now here you are, hiding in cheap clothes, sipping coffee like a man running from his own ghost. He flinched, because she wasn't wrong. For months, Alexander had wandered the streets under another name, fleeing not enemies, but the crushing emptiness wealth had given him. Billions in the bank, yet not a single memory that made him feel alive. The waitress's words pierced deeper than the sharpest blade. But then she leaned closer, lowering her voice to a whisper that carried more weight than any accusation. It's not just about my family. There's more. Something you don't know. Something you were never told. Alexander's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? She hesitated, looking around the alley as though shadows might be listening. My father. He didn't just die. He was silenced. After he tried to speak out against what happened, after he began collecting proof, he was gone within months. They said it was an accident. But I don't believe in accidents anymore. Her words sent a chill crawling up Alexander's spine. For a moment, the rain-slick alley seemed to close in on him, walls whispering secrets he had long ignored. Silenced by who? He pressed. She met his gaze, her eyes wet with fury and fear. By your company, Alexander. Or someone inside it. And I think, her voice cracked. I think they'll come for me next. Alexander's breath caught. This was no longer about guilt or promises broken. This was a reckoning, one that reached into the very bones of the empire he had built. And for the first time in years, Alexander felt something he had almost forgotten. Not wealth, not power, but fear. If her father was silenced, who in Alexander's empire is pulling the strings, and how deep does the conspiracy go? The word silenced reverberated through Alexander's chest like the toll of a bell he could not unhear. He stared at her, the photograph still clutched in his fist, its corners crumpled now from the pressure of his grip. Do you have proof? He asked finally, his voice low, nearly breaking. She shook her head. Not enough to take them down? My father tried to gather it, but after he died, papers disappeared, files vanished, and the people who once stood with him turned quiet. I was just a teenager then. No one listened to me. No one ever listens when it's a poor black girl against billionaires in suits. Her words landed like iron. Alexander opened his mouth to speak but found himself empty. For years, he had believed his fortune placed him at the top, a master of the machine. But now he realized he might have been just another cog, too blinded by ambition to see how many gears turned in shadow. He stepped back, leaning against the cold brick wall, staring up at the slice of night sky framed between the buildings. If what you say is true, if someone within my company silenced your father, his voice trailed off, unwilling to finish the thought. Then you're not in control of your empire, she said for him. Her words stabbed sharper than any accusation. Because deep down, he already knew. He had felt the pull for years. Board members making decisions without his presence, investors whispering in corners, lawyers crafting contracts that even he no longer fully read. Somewhere along the way, The empire had grown too vast, too sprawling, too monstrous, and now it seemed to have grown fangs. He turned back to her. Why tell me this now? Why risk giving me that note? Her lips quivered. Because I saw you tonight. Not as the man from the magazines, not as the suit on the stage. You looked broken, human. And for the first time, I thought maybe you'd actually listen. Maybe you'd care enough to uncover the truth. He swallowed hard. Listening to her hurt more than silence, because she had exposed something he never admitted to anyone. He was broken. His billions could build towers, but they couldn't rebuild the man inside. But her words also ignited something else in him, an ember of defiance. If the empire he had built was now a monster, then maybe it was time he stopped hiding and faced it. Alexander straightened, meeting her gaze. If there's a conspiracy inside my company, I'll find it. I'll tear it apart piece by piece. But I can't do it alone. She exhaled, relief and fear colliding in her eyes. Then you'll need me. I know the streets. I know the names. The people who vanished. Some of them trusted my father. I can lead you to the pieces he left behind. For the first time that night, Alexander saw not just anger in her eyes, but fire. A dangerous, determined fire. He nodded slowly. Then we start tonight. The words were bold, but as they echoed in the damp alley, Alexander felt the weight of them settle on his shoulders. He was no longer just a billionaire in disguise. He was a man standing at the edge of war, one against his own creation. And in that moment, he realized something chilling. If they were willing to kill her father, they wouldn't hesitate to kill him too. As Alexander vows to uncover the truth, he has no idea that the very people closest to him may already be watching and waiting for him to make a wrong move. The streets were quiet when they left the alley, their footsteps echoing on the wet pavement. The city seemed to breathe differently now, each flicker of light and shadow holding the weight of unseen eyes. Alexander pulled his hood lower, but it wasn't his disguise that shielded him. It was the sheer disbelief that he had agreed to walk deeper into this storm. The waitress, her name, he finally learned, was Naomi, walked beside him with a steady urgency, as if every minute brought them closer to danger. She led him several blocks away to a small library, its stone steps slick with rain, its windows glowing faintly despite the late hour. My father spent hours here, Naomi whispered. He said truth hides in places no one bothers to look, old records, public archives, things most people overlook. Inside, the library smelled of paper and dust, of stories forgotten by time. The night guard, half asleep at the desk, barely glanced at them before returning to his newspaper. Naomi guided Alexander to the basement, where rows of metal cabinets groaned under the weight of yellowing files. She pulled open a drawer with trembling hands, rifling through folders until she found what she sought. A slim, leather-bound notebook, edges worn, pages stuffed with clippings. She handed it to Alexander. My father's notes, she murmured. Alexander flipped through the pages. Newspaper articles about company acquisitions, property transfers, eviction notices. Scrawled in the margins were words underlined twice, 3 times. Corruption, silence, blood. Then one name kept appearing, circled so many times the paper was nearly torn through. Jonathan Hale. Alexander froze. Jonathan Hale wasn't just anyone. He was the chairman of Pierce Global's board, his right hand, a man he had trusted for over 2 decades. Impossible, Alexander muttered. Jonathan built this company with me. Naomi cut him off. He bled it dry while you looked the other way. Her voice cracked, but her eyes were merciless. My father tried to confront him. I heard the fight through the walls. 2 weeks later, my father was gone. Alexander's hands shook as he closed the notebook. His heart pounded with betrayal. Jonathan Hale, the man he'd toasted with champagne, the man who held his empire together when Alexander drifted. Could he really have silenced dissent in blood? Before he could speak, a noise broke the silence. A faint cry. Alexander stiffened. Naomi's eyes darted to the shadows between the stacks. Someone was there, watching. The guard upstairs hadn't moved. The building was silent. But in the hush, Alexander felt it, the subtle shift of air, the undeniable presence of another soul in the room. He whispered, "We're not alone." Naomi's hand gripped his sleeve, fear flashing across her face. And then, just as quickly as it came, the presence slipped away, footsteps fading, a door creaking open and closing somewhere above them. Alexander exhaled, but the relief was short-lived. Whoever had been there hadn't approached. They had been listening, which meant the secrets in Naomi's father's notebook were no longer theirs alone. As Alexander clutches the notebook filled with accusations against his most trusted ally, someone else now knows they've found it. And that someone is already one step ahead. They left the library in silence, the weight of the notebook pressing heavily between them. Alexander carried it inside his jacket, its thin leather cover feeling more dangerous than any weapon. The night was colder now, the damp air sharp against his skin. Naomi walked quickly, glancing over her shoulder with each step. Her unease bled into Alexander's chest, quickening his pulse. He had spent his life in boardrooms where threats came dressed in tailored suits and polite smiles, but this, being hunted in shadows, was unfamiliar. And yet, he knew instinctively this was far more real. They turned down a narrow street where the neon lights had burned out, leaving only the glow of a flickering lamppost. That's when Alexander heard its footsteps. Not echoing theirs, following. He stopped abruptly. The sound behind them stopped too. Naomi's breath hitched. They followed us. Alexander's mind raced. Whoever had been in the library basement wasn't content with eavesdropping. They wanted to track them. His hand brushed against the notebook, as if holding it tighter could shield them from the unseen eyes. "Come," he whispered, steering Naomi toward a side alley. The brick walls rose high, wet with rain, graffiti etched into their bones. They ducked behind a dumpster listening. The footsteps returned, slow, deliberate, circling the street they had just left. A silhouette passed under the lamppost. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in black. Naomi's grip tightened around Alexander's arm, her nails digging through his jacket. "That's how it started with my father," she whispered. "Men in shadows. Calls that went unanswered." And then, she couldn't finish. The figure paused at the mouth of the alley, scanning. Alexander held his breath, every muscle tense. Seconds stretched into eternity before the man continued walking, disappearing into the fog. But Alexander knew better. The watcher wasn't gone, just waiting. They emerged cautiously, blending into the emptiness of the street. Naomi's eyes shimmered with fear, but also something else. Defiance. "Jonathan Hale," Alexander muttered, more to himself than her. "If he's behind this, then the company's rot runs deeper than I ever imagined. He's always had the board in his pocket. If he's silencing people." Naomi cut in, her voice firm despite the tremor in it. "Then you can't trust anyone. Not your lawyers. Not your assistants. Not even your friends." The words stung because they rang true. Alexander thought of the men and women who had stood beside him for years, raising glasses to victories, assuring him they were loyal. But loyalty in business was a mask, easily swapped for greed. They reached Naomi's apartment. A crumbling building with paint peeling from its bricks and windows cracked like old scars. She unlocked the door quickly, ushering him inside. The air smelled faintly of coffee grounds and old wood. In the dim light, Alexander placed the notebook on her small kitchen table. Its pages stared back at him like a silent accusation. He looked at Naomi, her face tired but resolute. "If Jonathan is behind your father's death, then he won't stop at us finding this. He'll come harder. Faster." Naomi nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then we need to be ready." Alexander sat down, burying his face in his hands. For the first time in years, he felt the empire he had built shifting beneath his feet, its foundation rotting, its walls cracking. And now, sitting in a stranger's small apartment with danger pressing against the windows, he realized something terrifying. He no longer knew who was hunting him, or how far they would go. The shadow may have disappeared into the night, but Alexander and Naomi know it won't be long before it returns. And when it does, it won't come alone. By morning, Alexander felt like a man split in two. On one side, the billionaire the world knew, the untouchable figure in sharp suits, whose name echoed across stock markets and headlines. On the other, the man Naomi had dragged from the shadows, a fugitive from his own empire, clutching a notebook that threatened to unravel everything. But one truth pulsed stronger than his fear. If Jonathan Hale was truly behind this, Alexander couldn't afford silence. He borrowed Naomi's phone. His own devices were too easily traced, and dialed a private number that only 3 people in the world knew. When Jonathan's voice came through the line, smooth as ever, Alexander felt both comfort and dread. "Jonathan, lunch today?" "Just us," Alexander said firmly. There was a pause, subtle but sharp, before Jonathan replied, "Of course, I've missed our talks." The meeting was set at an exclusive club downtown, one Alexander himself had funded years ago. As he entered, every polished surface mocked him, every chandelier and marble column a monument to wealth that now felt like chains. Jonathan was already there, seated at a corner table. Tall, silver-haired, immaculately dressed, he radiated calm authority. He rose to embrace Alexander like an old friend. "You look tired," Jonathan said, eyes narrowing slightly. "Traveling incognito again." The words felt like a dagger disguised as a joke. How much did he know? They sat. Alexander ordered nothing. Jonathan sipped his wine leisurely. For a moment, the noise of clinking glasses and murmured conversations filled the air. Then Alexander leaned forward. "I came across something last night. Old files. Records of acquisitions, neighborhoods we destroyed. Families ruined." Jonathan's smile didn't falter, but his eyes sharpened. "That was business, Alexander. Progress demands sacrifice. You taught me that." Alexander's stomach turned. "And what about Naomi's father?" he asked suddenly. The name dropped between them like a stone into still water. Jonathan set his glass down slowly. "Ah, so that's what this is about." His tone was cool, detached. "You've been talking to her." Alexander's blood ran cold. Jonathan knew. Her father tried to fight. Jonathan continued. He didn't understand the game. People like him never do. "And you?" He leaned in, voice lowering to a whisper. You weren't supposed to find out. For a heartbeat, Alexander couldn't breathe. His worst fear wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was confession. Did you kill him? Alexander demanded, voice trembling. Jonathan chuckled softly, shaking his head. Kill is such a heavy word. Let's just say problems were resolved. For your empire's sake. For your sake. Alexander gripped the edge of the table, fury boiling under his skin. The man he had trusted most had become executioner in his name. You've built your fortune on blood, Alexander, Jonathan said calmly. Don't pretend otherwise. And now that you're sniffing around, you've put yourself in danger. If you walk away quietly, we'll both survive this. If you don't, his voice trailed off, leaving the threat unspoken but unmistakable. Jonathan leaned back, finishing his wine with ease, as though he hadn't just confessed to orchestrating ruin. Think carefully, old friend. Loyalty has kept me by your side all these years. But betrayal, he smiled thinly. Betrayal is something I don't forgive. Alexander sat frozen, his world collapsing in silence around him. Jonathan's chilling warning makes it clear Alexander's life is now on the line. But will he choose silence, or risk everything to expose the truth? The air outside the cafe had turned sharp and cold, though it was only late afternoon. Marcus walked out, shoulders heavy, the note still crumpled in his hand. His chest rose and fell with a storm he couldn't name. Fear, anger, sorrow all tangled together. The streets blurred before his eyes as if the city itself had become distorted under the weight of the truth. He had thought himself untouchable. He had built walls of steel, brick, and gold around his life so no one could reach him. Yet here he was undone by a handwritten message slipped into his palm by a trembling young woman. The words, "They are watching you. You are not safe. Don't go home," burned into his memory. He had read it 100 times in the span of minutes. Who was they? What did they want? And how could a waitress he had never met know more about his danger than the team of analysts and security consultants he paid millions to? He leaned against a lamppost, staring at the city's restless rhythm. A group of teenagers laughed as they passed, their carefree energy mocking his unease. A mother carried groceries while guiding her daughter across the street. Life carried on as though his world hadn't just been shaken. He thought of Alia, her eyes, dark yet alive with unspoken grief, her voice so soft but steady when she whispered about the note. There had been no trace of deceit in her. She had looked at him not as a billionaire, not as a man hidden beneath wealth and status, but as a human being in need of saving. For Marcus, trust was a rare currency, one he hadn't spent in years. And yet, in that moment, he trusted her more than anyone he had ever hired. But trust had always been his undoing. His phone buzzed, jarring him from his thoughts. The caller ID showed a familiar name, Richard Hayes, his right-hand man in the company, the one who knew almost everything about his empire. For a second, relief flickered across Marcus's face. Maybe Richard had answers. Maybe the danger was exaggerated. He answered, his voice low. Richard. There was a pause on the other end. Too long, too heavy. Then Richard's voice came, calm and clipped. Where are you? Marcus froze. Something in the tone, cold, detached, made his blood run cold. This wasn't the voice of loyalty. It was the voice of a man who already knew too much. You sound different, Marcus said cautiously. Another pause. Then Richard chuckled, though it wasn't the laugh Marcus knew. We've been patient with you. But patience runs out. You should have stayed where you were, Marcus. The line went dead. Marcus stared at the phone in disbelief, his heart pounding like a war drum. Betrayal sliced through him like a blade. Richard, the man he had trusted, the one he had built his empire beside, was part of they. The city suddenly felt hostile, every shadow hiding an enemy, every face a potential spy. Marcus clenched his fists. For the first time in years, the billionaire realized he was truly alone. And then, like an echo through the noise of his fear, he remembered Alia's last words before he left the cafe. Don't go home. If you value your life, follow me when the time comes. Marcus's chest tightened. She was the only one he could trust now. But trusting her meant stepping into a world he couldn't control. The dawn broke gently, its first rays painting the skyline in hues of amber and rose. For the first time in years, Thomas Kane stood by his office window and felt the warmth on his face, not as an untouchable symbol of wealth, but as an invitation. A reminder that he was still alive, still capable of change. The walls of his office, once sterile monuments to his ambition, now felt different. They breathed. They bore witness. In front of him sat the file, the one that contained Mariah's note, neatly preserved in a glass sleeve. He had placed it there to remind himself every morning why he must never forget. 3 simple words that had reshaped his life. Help us, please. Thomas turned away from the window as Mariah stepped in, holding a cup of coffee. This time, she wasn't in a diner uniform. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair tied back, her eyes steady and unafraid. She placed the cup in front of him without a word. You don't have to bring me coffee, Thomas said gently. I know, Maria replied with a faint smile, but it feels right. Her resilience never ceased to humble him. It was her courage that had dismantled the fortress he had built around his heart. She hadn't just asked him for help. She had unknowingly taught him what it meant to truly see another human being. "Maria," Thomas began, his voice hesitant, "I've made arrangements for Elijah. His medical care is covered. The best doctors will oversee his treatment. And I've set up a trust in your name. For his future, for yours." Her lips parted in shock, her eyes filling with tears. She tried to blink away. "You don't have to do this, Thomas. You've already done more than I ever imagined." He shook his head. "It's not charity. It's not pity. It's a debt. One I owe you, for reminding me that beneath all the money, all the titles, I am still a man capable of failing and of changing." Maria reached across the desk, her hand resting on his. "You've already changed. I see it. Elijah will too." The weight of her words sank deep into him. For years, Thomas had chased legacy through skyscrapers and boardrooms, but this simple act of being remembered by someone whose life he had touched, felt like the truest kind of immortality. Later that evening, Thomas walked into the diner again. Not as an undercover billionaire, not as a ghost in disguise, but as himself. The regulars glanced up, confused, until Mariah's son Elijah, his frail frame wrapped in a soft sweater, pointed at him. "That's him, Mama," Elijah whispered, his smile weak but bright. "That's the man who helped us." And in that moment, Thomas Kane, once feared, once untouchable, felt his knees weaken. Because redemption wasn't found in wealth or power. It was in the fragile, fleeting smile of a boy who believed in him. For the first time in his life, Thomas no longer feared being remembered. He feared being forgotten. And now, he knew he wouldn't be.
A billionaire walks into a cafe, expecting only coffee, but a simple note from a quiet waitress shatters his world. What begins as an ordinary morning turns into a storm of buried truths, regret, and redemption. This is a story of secrets revealed, hearts broken, and a second chance that could change everything.